Welcome back to the series on Dr. Paul Sloan's book, Jesus and the Law of Moses. In this chapter, chapter 4, Dr. Sloan turns to conflict and controversy in the Gospels. Jesus came into conflict with his contemporaries over purity, Sabbath observance, table fellowship, family, and the temple tax. These disputes reveal interpretive fault lines. When Jesus is challenged, we see not only what he does, but how he defends his actions within Scripture, Torah, and Jewish legal reasoning. Sloan argues that many scholars have drawn the wrong conclusion from these controversies. Some claim Jesus disregarded purity in food laws to show that only love and faith matter. Others argue that Jesus redefined Israel's identity by replacing allegiance to Torah with allegiance to himself. Others say Jesus replaced purity with mercy. Sloan's contention is that such readings misunderstand the debates. Jesus is not rejecting the law, abandoning Jewish practice, or setting mercy against Torah. He is offering alternative interpretations of the commandments. This chapter does not cover every controversy. Sloan focuses on passages where scholars have claimed Jesus breaks with Judaism or the law, purity, hand washing, healing on the Sabbath, and the temple tax. The governing question is whether Jesus' conflicts show him breaking from Torah or interpreting Torah differently. Sloan's answer is that Jesus is not anti-Torah. He engages the law from within, challenging certain interpretations while giving his own authoritative reading of obedience. Sloan begins with purity. According to the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus did not reject the purity regulations. He kept them and taught others to do the same. Modern claims to the contrary often confuse basic issues in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The law does not prohibit touching a person with lepra. Touching such a person could communicate ritual impurity, but contracting impurity is not the same as sinning. Impurity was a normal part of life under the law. The issue was how impurity was handled. Jesus does prioritize moral purity over ritual purity, but this is not a rejection of the law. Leviticus, the prophets, and many Second Temple Jewish texts also treat moral corruption as more serious than ritual impurity. Nor does Jesus dismiss ritual purification after healing the man with lepra. He commands the man to show himself to the priest and offer the sacrifices Moses required. Likewise, ritual purification was not only for priests. Leviticus 11 through 15 and Numbers 19 showed that these regulations affected ordinary Israelites. The conflict, then, should not be read as Jesus versus the law. It is a debate over interpretation, application, and priority. In Luke 11, Jesus speaks about cleaning the inside of the cup. A Pharisee is surprised that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Jesus responds that the Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and wickedness. He then says, "Give what is within as alms, and behold, everything is clean for you." Many take this to mean that Jesus replaced ritual purity with moral purity. Sloan argues otherwise. The surrounding context concerns inner light and outer illumination. The inside affects the outside. Jesus' point is not that the exterior does not matter, but that the interior cannot be ignored. This is confirmed by Jesus' next statement. He criticizes the Pharisees for tithing garden herbs while neglecting justice and the love of God, yet adds, "These things you should have done without neglecting the others." Priority does not mean cancellation. Justice and love matter more, but tithing is not thereby nullified. The same logic applies to purity. Jesus' image of unmarked graves also assumes the purity system. An unmarked grave transmits impurity unknowingly. If Jesus had dismissed ritual impurity, the insult would lose its force. Likewise, when Jesus asks, Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? He assumes that both matter. Sloan explains the vessel background. In Jewish purity discussions, cups could be considered in the terms of interior and exterior. If only the exterior was defiled, cleaning the exterior might suffice. But if the interior was defiled, wiping the outside did nothing. Jesus applies this to the Pharisees. They are like cups, cleaned externally while remaining internally defiled by greed. Since the problem is greed, the proper purification is almsgiving. Jewish texts, such as Proverbs, Sirach, and Tobit, could speak of almsgiving as purifying sin. That does not abolish ritual purity, it addresses moral corruption. In Mark 7, scribes and Pharisees ask why Jesus' disciples eat bread with impure, unwashed hands. Sloan emphasizes that the question is not about eating pork, shellfish, or prohibited food from Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. The issue is eating permitted food with unwashed hands. Many translations render Mark 7:19 as, "Thus he declared all foods clean," as though Jesus abolished the food laws. Sloan follows scholars such as Logan Williams in arguing that this misreads both the grammar and the legal issue. Mark 7 concerns ritual purity, not with the permissible menu. Food laws and purity laws both use clean and unclean language, but they are distinct categories. Prohibited animals are unclean, yet eating them does not ritually defile the eater in the same way that contact with corpses, discharges, or certain carcasses does. Jesus is not answering a question about prohibited food. He is answering a question about whether permitted food becomes defiling when eaten with unwashed hands. His answer is that defilement does not occur through ingestion. The phrase, cleansing all foods, is better understood as referring to the body's digestive processes. Even if permitted food were contaminated by unwashed hands, the body processes and expels it. In Jewish purity categories, excrement was not automatically ritually impure. Matthew's version states the point plainly. To eat with unwashed hands does not defile the person. Jesus then turns to moral defilement. Evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, deceit, pride, and foolishness proceed from the heart. Mark 7, therefore, does not abolish Israel's food laws. It rejects the claim that eating permitted food with unwashed hands defiles the person, while warning that moral corruption is the deeper danger. Sloan then turns to Sabbath healing. In Luke 13, Jesus heals a woman bent double for 18 years. The synagogue official objects that healing should occur on the other 6 days, not on the Sabbath. Jesus does not defend himself by claiming the woman's life was in danger. He gives a legal argument. If one may untie an ox or a donkey on the Sabbath and lead it to water, how much more may a daughter of Abraham bound by Satan for 18 years be released on the Sabbath? This is not Jesus dismissing the Sabbath. It is Jesus reasoning from the Sabbath's own purpose. The Sabbath command includes rest for oxen, donkeys, sons, and daughters. If animals may be released to receive rest, this daughter of Abraham may be released from bondage to receive Sabbath rest. Luke 13 also has an eschatological dimension. In Luke 4, Jesus announces Isaiah 61. Good news, release to the captives in the year of the Lord's favor. Sloan connects this to Jubilee. The woman is not merely sick, she is bound by Satan. Her healing is release from bondage. Jesus' claim that it was necessary to heal her on the Sabbath suggests that the Sabbath functions as a miniature Jubilee. Since Jesus is the herald of restoration, the Sabbath is the fitting day for release. Luke 14 presents a similar controversy with the man with dropsy. Jesus asks whether it is lawful to heal on the Sabbath. After healing the man, he asks which of them would not immediately pull out a son or ox that fell into a well on the Sabbath. The argument is partly lesser to greater and partly analogy. If they would rescue an animal or their own son, they cannot consistently condemn Jesus for rescuing this man. Jesus may be reasoning from the Sabbath command. A son or ox trapped in a well is not enjoying Sabbath rest. To secure the rest promised by the Sabbath, one must act. In that sense, action on the Sabbath may serve the Sabbath rather than violate it. Sloan notes that not all Jewish groups agreed on such matters. The Damascus document reflects a stricter position, but Jesus' question assumes his Pharisaic hearers would admit that they themselves would rescue a son or ox. His point exposes inconsistency. In Matthew 17, Sloan examines the temple tax. Collectors ask Peter whether Jesus pays it. Jesus asks whether kings collect taxes from their sons or from strangers. Peter answers, from strangers. And Jesus says, then the sons are exempt. Some infer that Jesus and his disciples are the sons while the rest of Israel are strangers, or that Jesus asserts freedom from the law as son. Sloan argues that this misunderstands the issue. The annual temple tax was not a Mosaic commandment. Exodus 30 requires a half shekel payment in connection with a census, not an annual tax. Nehemiah 10 mentions a yearly temple contribution, but it is self-imposed and amounts to a third of a shekel. Josephus similarly distinguishes the census payment commanded by Moses from the annual half shekel custom. Jesus is not setting aside the Torah. He is distinguishing commandment from custom. His point is not that Jesus and his disciples are sons while other Jews are foreigners. Rather, Israel are God's sons. Therefore, an annual tax for God's house should not be imposed on them as though they were outsiders. Since God did not command the annual payment, the sons are exempt. Nevertheless, Jesus pays it in order to avoid unnecessary offense. Sloan concludes that these controversies do not show Jesus rejecting the law. His distinct practices arise from alternative readings of the relevant commands. With the partial exception of Luke 13, where Sabbath healing is also shaped by his Jubilee mission, these disputes are not primarily governed by a separate eschatological agenda. They are legal agreements over purity, Sabbath, and custom. In the next chapter, we will focus on practices more directly informed by Jesus' eschatological agenda, what Sloan calls his eschatological nomism. This chapter has argued that Jesus is not anti-law. He is an authoritative interpreter of Torah, practicing it in light of God's purposes and Israel's promised restoration. Thank you again for joining us for this chapter. And as always, I hope you learned something. Pick up the book for yourself. It definitely should dispel many of the common myths that are out there about Jesus and the law of Moses. So we'll see you next time for the next chapter.